Welcome to the War Garden. The War Garden? How about a little bit of history? Just, I'm going to let you guys watch the chickens, and I'm going to try and give you a little bit of history. Maybe this tripod ain't going to work the way I want it to. Let's see if that stays. The War Garden goes back to World War I, 1917. Um, they organized the National War Garden Commission to encourage us to contribute to the war effort by growing our own stuff, our own vegetables, fruits, veggies. Um, the Parks Commission, whatever there was of that in that time, you were allowed to grow in parks, private property, school grounds, company grounds, backyards, vacant lots. There was a lot of propaganda posters, nice and color. I mean, the old advertising was so ahead of its time. It was so good. Sow the seeds of victory, planting your own vegetables. It was a war garden movement. It was spread by word of mouth, women's clubs, civic associations, chambers of commerce. Everybody was encouraging people to grow gardens, war gardens. Um, the government, turned its attention to distributing and canning and drying manuals so that people could help preserve their own surplus crops. Bureau of Education started the U.S. School Garden Army to mobilize children as soldiers of the soil. I can't imagine anything like that happening today, but by the end of World War I, the campaign promoting home gardens, uh, they were referred to during the war as war gardens or liberty gardens. After the war, people started calling them victory gardens. Um, Pretty much it dropped off after the war. Some of the people continued to maintain them, but it did drop off. And then, right after the Second World War, the victory gardens began to reemerge, and commercial crops were diverted to the military overseas, while transportation was redirected towards moving the troops and munitions, not food. Food rationing was started to take place in the U.S. in 1942. So we Americans had a great incentive to grow our own stuff, and we did. I've heard different um, amounts, percentages, but they said that 40% of the produce was grown by or in victory gardens by people that were not farmers. Eleanor Roosevelt planted a victory garden on the White House lawn, and there you have it. So what's old is new again. Homesteading, we call it homesteading, but it started with war gardens. People grew it locally, you ate what was in season when it was in season, and you learned how to can so that when it wasn't in season, you could still have the food that you wanted. Popular vegetables grown were beans, beets, cabbage, carrots, kale, yeah, kohlrabi, lettuce, peas, tomatoes, turnips, squash, Swiss chard. Um, Pamphlets were given by the government to encourage you to garden and how. World War One was interesting more because President Woodrow Wilson started, what the heck was the name of it? The U.S. Department of Food. and he chose Herbert Hoover to head that up. Some of you will understand the significance of that. And, it's just interesting. Everybody worked together, number one, to win the war that we were fighting, but also the war on rationing. And it worked. 40% of the food that was eaten in this country was produced by home gardeners. Which brings me to my history. We called it gardening. Today it's homesteading, but the only thing I'm doing different that I did in the 70s is it's a lot larger. My cousin Anthony was telling me about a year ago, my grandfather and some of the paisans, some of his family, in a vacant lot in the Bronx. Hard to imagine a vacant lot in the Bronx these days, but in a vacant lot, they were growing their own stuff in the 50s. When my grandfather built the house in Westchester County, growing up, we always had a garden. He used chemicals, I don't. He used to go to the horse track and get the horse manure and put it into the soil. But it was fertile soil, and we used to till that every year, going out there and by hand with a shovel, turning that soil. It was a lot of work. And then, of course, I became a teenager. Grandfather was living in Florida. I was still in Westchester County. I got married, started the garden up again, and we were growing tomatoes and beans and cucumbers. I mean, the soil up there was so fertile. Fertilizers, we rarely use fertilizer. Horse manure was or cow manure was about it. But, little garden, it was, I don't know, 16 by 20 maybe. Of course, now I'm way bigger than that, but, we grew our own stuff. We didn't call it homesteading, we called it gardening. That's what you did. Yeah, that camera's shaking. That phone is shaking. You grew your own stuff, and people got away from it. Now people are coming back to it. They're just doing more. I mean, I still have the garden. It's just larger. 23 years ago, my father-in-law got us our first chickens, and he really built us our first chicken coop with a canopy that I had. And, that's where it started. We've just grown from there. Now, this garden here, this war garden, there was a post right about where that onion is. That was the end of the garden. In the beginning, there's the post right there. Not the one the fence is around, not the T stake. There's a wooden fence post. Right there. Right there. That was the one corner of the garden went over to that fence post here. Of course, this palm tree wasn't that big. Went over to this post here, and it went up to about where the chicken coop corner is right there. That was our garden. Now it's gotten 50% larger, plus we have a bigger garden on the other side, the corn garden. So, I mean, you call it homesteading? It's just a bigger victory garden. Grow your own victory garden. Grow your own war garden. It's a war on prices. Grow locally. Eat locally whenever you can. Eat as chemical free as you can. Maybe you can have chickens. Nice thing about World War I and World War II, there were no HOAs to tell you couldn't grow things. In fact, the federal government was encouraging you to grow things. If you live in an HOA and you say you can't grow things, well, you need to talk to your HOA. You really need to start a war garden. or a victory garden, whichever way you want to look at it. Start a victory garden. Maybe you can't have chickens. Most places will allow you 4 hens. The hens are generally quieter than with roosters. 4 of them will give you 3 eggs a day. You can do it. There's places around that'll build you a coop, small coop if you don't know how. You can, they're mobile. You can move them every day, so you're not killing all your grass. Or you can use them to kill your grass and grow food. I hope your weekend is victorious. In the future, we'll have less history and more on how to start your seeds and when to start them for Florida. Because Florida is a whole different animal if you're coming from up north. I do want to give a shout out to Juana over at Rio's Family Garden. She's a subscriber, and I've had a lot of good conversations with her. And I like what she's doing up there in Georgia. She too is promoting to grow your own, eat local, and I love it. Need more of yous doing that. To have a blessed weekend. Bye now.